Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2017, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I would ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the topic of this special order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the House of Representatives will vote on the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. And before that occurs, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to come to the floor tonight and just remind all of us that the United States of America is indeed a unique nation that is premised on the foundation that we are all created equal, and that each of us is endowed by our Creator with the unalienable right to live. But 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, numerous video recordings were released that incontrovertibly documented corporate officers and employees of Planned Parenthood casually discussing their rampant practice of harvesting and selling the little body parts from many of the hundreds of thousands of innocent babies they are guilty of killing in their abortion clinics across this nation every year. Now, these videos irrefutably reveal officers of Planned Parenthood haggling over the price of these little organs and body parts, and casually describing ways of killing these little babies, often using much more painful methods like partial birth abortion to make sure that the saleable organs of these little babies remain undamaged. One of these videos described an incident where one of Planned Parenthood's employees calls one of the younger employees over to witness something that was, quote, kind of cool. Unquote, that one of those babies' heart was still beating. The older employee said, quote, okay, this is really a good fetus, and it looks like we can procure a lot from it. We are going to procure a brain, unquote. Then, using scissors, together the 2 employees, starting at the baby's chin, cut upward through the center of this child's face, and then pulled out the baby's little brain and placed it in a container where it could later be sold. Mr. Speaker, I find it so crushingly sad that the only time this little baby was ever held by anyone in his very short life was by those who cut his face open to take his brain. Have we forgotten that not so long ago, authorities entered the clinic of Dr. Kermit Gosnell, and there they found a torture chamber for little babies that defies within the constraints of the English language any description. The grand jury at that time reported, quote, Dr. Kermit Gosnell had a simple solution for unwanted babies. He killed them. He didn't call it that. He called it ensuring fetal demise. The way he ensured fetal demise was by sticking scissors in the back of the baby's neck and cutting the spinal cord. He called it snipping. Over the years, there were hundreds of snippings. Ashley Baldwin, one of Dr. Gosnell's employees, said she saw babies breathing, and she described one as 2 feet long that no longer had eyes or a mouth, but were, in her words, making like this, quote, screeching noise. And she said it, quote, sounded like a little alien. For God's sake, Mr. Speaker, this can't be who we truly are. The fact is that more than 18,000 late-term pain-capable unborn children were torturously killed without anesthesia in America in just the last year. Many of them cried and screamed as they died, but because it was amniotic fluid going over the vocal cords, we couldn't hear them. It is the worst human rights atrocity in the United States of America. Now, I know that many of those on this floor and the American media will hold to the standard line and try to cloak all of this in the name of freedom of choice. But I would beg them, Mr. Speaker, to open their hearts and ask themselves what is so liberating about brutally and painfully dismembering living, helpless little human babies. In spite of all the political noise, protecting these little helpless, pain-capable, unborn children and their mothers is not a Republican issue, and it is not a Democrat issue. It is a basic test of our basic humanity and who we are as a human family. Mr. Speaker, the sands of time should blow over this Capitol dome before we ever give Planned Parenthood one more dime of taxpayer money. And in the name of humanity, Democrat senators should not be allowed to filibuster the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act in the Senate, because passing it would prevent the vast majority of these ongoing evil acts of torture against helpless little pain-capable human babies that these videos have now shown so clearly to the entire world. And Mr. Speaker, with that, I would yield for one moment till I can recognize someone else. Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, one of the greatest pro-life champions in the history of the United States and a precious friend, Chris Smith.
Thank my good friend for yielding and for his passion, for his courage, and for authoring the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, and for doing so with so informed. Trent Franks has been an incredible defender of life. And I want to thank him for his leadership on this extraordinarily important human rights piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, overwhelming majorities of Americans, some 60 to 64%, according to the pollsters, support legal protection for pain-capable unborn children. Today, we know that unborn babies not only die, but suffer excruciating pain during dismemberment abortions, a cruelty that rips arms and legs off of helpless children. A former abortionist, Dr. Anthony Levantino, testified before Congress, before Trent Franks' committee. Here's a man who has performed 1,200 abortions, over 100 late-term abortions, up to 24 weeks. And he said, and I quote in part, "Imagine if you can that you are a pro-choice obstetrician gynecologist like I was, using a Software 13 clamp with rows of ridges or teeth, grasp anything you can inside the womb. Once you've grasped something inside, squeeze on the clamp to set the jaws and pull hard, really hard. You feel something let go and out pops a fully formed leg about 6 inches long. Reach in again," he goes on, "and grasp anything you can, and out pops an arm." He noted that a second trimester D&E abortion is a blind procedure. So he says, reach in again and again and again with that clamp and tear out the spine, intestines, heart, and lungs. Mr. Speaker, even swing vote Justice Anthony Kennedy, in his dissent in the Stenberg versus Carhart decision, said about dismemberment abortion, "The fetus in many cases dies just as a human adult or child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn limb from limb. The fetus can be alive at the beginning of the dismemberment process and can survive for a while until its limbs are being torn off." Mr. Speaker, even if pain wasn't present, dismembering a child is violence against children, and it is inhumane. But these babies actually suffer in this process. Dr. Robert White, professor of neurosurgery at Case Western Reserve, has said, "An unborn child at 20 weeks gestation is fully capable of experiencing pain. Without question, abortion is a dreadfully painful experience." Dr. Anand wrote, and he's an expert on pain, "The human fetus possesses the ability to experience pain from 20 weeks gestation." He points out that it's even worse for an unborn child at that time period because, quote, "the density of pain receptors per square inch of skin in human development occurs in utero from 20 to 30 weeks gestation. Thus, a fetus at 20 to 32 weeks gestation would experience much more intense pain than older infants or children or adults. We've known this for some time, Mr. Speaker. In 2006, I authored the Unborn Pain Awareness Act that garnered 250 votes in favor, including 40 Democrats to 160 against. I remember thinking on that day of the vote, how can anyone refuse to make pain information part of an informed consent? Congressman Trent Franks has authored four, count them, four, extraordinarily important human rights bills over the years to actually protect pain-capable babies in federal law from the violence of abortion, including the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Acts that passed the House in 2013 and again in 2015. Tragically, President Obama vowed to veto this child protection legislation, and the Senate failed to pass it. However, this year, we have a president who said, and he put out a statement of administration policy, you present this legislation to me and I will sign it. Finally, not only will babies be protected by Trent Franks' law at 5 months, and the pain suffered by these babies will be averted, but H.R. 36 requires that a late abortion, permitted under very, very limited circumstances, provide, quote, the best opportunity for the unborn child to survive, and that a, quote, second physician trained in neonatal resuscitation be present and prepared to provide care to that child to the same degree as the Born Alive Infants Protection Act of 2002 prescribed. Following the care required to be rendered, the born alive child shall immediately be transported and admitted to a hospital. 16 states have passed legislation that looks very, very resembles this important legislation that we will have before us on this House floor. My good friend and colleagues talked about Dr. Gosnell. 4 years ago, Dr. Gosnell was convicted of murder, conspiracy to kill, and involuntary manslaughter, and sentenced to life imprisonment. Even though the news of Gosnell's child slaughter was largely suppressed by the mainstream media, many of my colleagues may remember that Gosnell operated a large Philadelphia abortion clinic where women died and countless babies were dismembered. All crucial, gruesome procedures causing excruciating pain to the victim. This is a humane bill, a major human rights bill, and again, I want to thank my great friend and colleague for his leadership. It's extraordinary.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman, and I would now yield 5 minutes to the gentlelady from Missouri, Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler.
Well, thank you so much, my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Franks, Trent Franks, who is certainly a champion of our time in standing up for life, for our national defense, and has the heart so big that comes through in everything he does. And certainly tonight, I think we see your heart for unborn children, certainly at the beginning of 6 months of age, who deserve to live. And your bill, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, is also known as Micah's Law, will do that. And I urge all my colleagues to support it tomorrow. But tonight, Mr. Speaker, I want to share with you a heartwarming story that puts a face to what we're talking about. It's one thing to say 20 weeks old, a baby, unborn baby, but it's another thing to look at the picture of Micah Pickering. And his picture's up there as well at the front. But Micah Pickering was born at 20 weeks old gestation. He was born at the age of which we are talking about, that you are trying to say we should not allow for abortions at this stage because he can live. And Micah is a living example of that. You know, I want to share a little bit about what his mother shared about his story with Micah, her son. His mother's name's Danielle, and she recalled that when Micah was born, he cried twice immediately. And that was music to her ears and contrary to the worst case scenarios of which Micah's parents were bracing. And this is what Danielle talked about during those first few moments. She said, "The second I was able to meet Micah, changed my life. He was so small. I didn't know what to expect. Would he look normal? Would I bond with this baby? And those questions were a mess in my head as I was wheeled into his room 2 hours after his birth. The sight I saw was a perfectly formed baby at 20 weeks. At the beginning of 6 months, she says he was a perfectly formed baby. Lots of tubes and monitors were all set up to be an artificial womb for this baby born too soon. My husband and I stood there just staring at this beautiful little boy who we were told we couldn't hold yet as the skin was so sensitive it would hurt him. We were told we could press lightly on the skin, so each one of us put our hand near him. He, the baby, Micah, reached up and held our fingers. That was the strongest grasp I would ever feel. I never knew how strong a baby was until that moment. He had a powerful grip on our hands and now has a powerful grip on our hearts. This little miracle baby spent 4 months in intensive care. He underwent heart surgery 2 weeks after birth, weighing a little over a pound. He was on a ventilator for a while. He was on morphine to ease the pain. And this was the size of the diaper that he wore. Isn't that incredible? But he wore a diaper that size. And this little preemie, when he was born, he was the size of an M&M package. It's hard to believe that a baby could be that small and live, but that's about the size of a baby at this age, 20 weeks old, beginning of 6 months. And he lived. His name is Micah. Now, he is a healthy, energetic kindergarten student. And Micah's story is beautiful. It is a miracle. And we thank God for Micah's fighting spirit, for his parents' unwavering love for their son, and for the team of doctors, nurses, surgeons, and medical professionals who tended to Micah during those first few months. But the point is about Micah, he puts a face on this, that from the moment of conception to the birth of a child, the growth and development of the baby is miraculous. And with advances in medical science, we can better understand what is happening at each stage of development. When these little babies are just 4 weeks old, the basics of their nervous system are developed. By 8 weeks after fertilization, the unborn child reacts to touch. After 20 weeks, and that's the age of your bill, the unborn child reacts to stimuli that would be recognized as painful if applied to an adult human, for example, by recoiling. And we know that by the 20th week, beginning of the 6th month, unborn babies, children the same age as Micah when he was born, respond to painful stimuli by flinching, jerking, just like you and I would if we were burned or hurt in some way. Now, Micah's parents were told that they could not hold their little son. That would be too painful for their newborn. But babies at this stage are actually hyper-responsive to pain, since the neurological features that inhibit or regulate pain sensations do not develop until much later in pregnancy. Certainly, these babies should not undergo this pain, and certainly not have to have their life snuffed out through abortion. When a mother and her unborn baby undergo a surgical procedure, doctors give fetal pain medication or fetal anesthesia to the baby so that he or she does not feel the procedure. This is common practice. It's common sense. The legislation before the House tomorrow will ensure that unborn children are not subjected to the excruciating pain of being euthanized in the womb. And this is where I wish the story could end, that all children be given a fighting chance like Micah, but that's not the case for too many children whose lives are taken from them before they can take their first breath. Late-term abortion procedures, abortions performed on babies 20 weeks and later in pregnancy, are graphic, detestable, and tragically allowed in this country. In a dissent opinion that Representative Smith just shared, and I want to share it again, Justice Kennedy offered the insight into this grisly practice. He said, "The fetus, in many cases, dies just as a human adult or born child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn limb from limb." Aborted unborn babies endure unspeakable pain in the most horrific manner possible. Knowing that innocent 20-week babies acutely experience pain and endure inhumane dismemberment or poisoning should be enough to pierce each of our hearts and prick our sensibilities. Micah's Law, the legislation that would protect the lives of unborn children halfway through pregnancy because of their ability to feel pain, is our call to action. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to leave you with the words of Micah's mom as she watched her tiny infant grow into the child he is today. And it speaks to the potential of every one of these children that we hope from now on will have a chance to live like Micah. She said he still had his eyes fused shut. You could see his chest vibrate from the ventilators. It was heartbreaking. Here was a boy who we would get to see take his first sneeze, his first smile. We would get to see the hiccups from the outside. We would watch his eyes slowly unfuse. We would watch his hair grow in, and we would watch his body develop. It was indescribably the most joyful time of our life. So as we anticipate tomorrow's historic vote, I ask my colleagues to lend their support for Micah and thousands of children just like him who want to live, who want to experience life, and who have so much to give. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
And I thank the gentlelady, and I would now yield 3 minutes to Congressman Mike Johnson. Very grateful that she's here tonight, sir.
Thank you, Congressman Franks and Congressman Smith, Hartzler, King, and all the others, all my colleagues who have spent so many years working for the sanctity of every human life in this chamber. I've, for nearly 20 years, been working to defend the sanctity of every human life in the courts. And that brings us to here today. You know, you and I have talked about this many times, that it's our nation's birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, which states so succinctly what has been known as the American Creed. And that creed is articulated in the second paragraph of the Declaration. We know the language well. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these, the rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. The reason the founders recognized that fundamental freedom, the right to life, and recognized it first, is because it is so essential to who we are as human beings. And the reason the founders recognized that and sought to put it first is because they understood, they acknowledged that we are made in the image of a holy God. We're made in the image of that Creator who gave us those rights. And because of that, every single human life has inestimable dignity and value. And our value is not related in any way to our socioeconomic status, the color of our skin, where we went to school, what we make for a living, what we can contribute to society, our talents, how good looking we are. Totally irrelevant. Our value is inherent because it is given to us by our Creator. So tomorrow, because of your hard work, we have a landmark opportunity with the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. And I am proud to stand in support of that bill and to assist as a co-sponsor and to encourage all of our colleagues to support this important legislation. Why do we do this? Because, as has been mentioned, at 20 weeks gestation, a baby is developed enough to live and grow outside the womb. And at 20 weeks, a baby can feel pain. Yet in the United States, we remain one of only 7 nations on the planet, including North Korea and China, I might add, that allows abortions after 20 weeks. It's a practice that kills thousands of innocent babies each year, as we know. And a law that allows someone to end the life of an unborn baby when that child can live outside the womb and feel the pain inflicted by this violent procedure is simply unconscionable. These procedures can be fatal not only for the child, by the way, but for the mother as well, because abortions performed later in the pregnancies put the mother at greater risk. We have to pass this bill to ensure that America leads in the fight to protect the most vulnerable among us. All life is precious, and this bill protects the life of the mother and that of the unborn child. And for those reasons, I urge my colleagues to stand with us in support of this important legislation and join us in the efforts to defend the defenseless. And I yield back.
And Mr. Speaker, I so sincerely thank the gentleman and would now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Iowa, my precious friend Steve King.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona for recognizing me and yielding some time. And I appreciate the years that we've sat elbow to elbow on the Judiciary Committee and on the Constitution Subcommittee and done the battle for life. But what I'm reflecting on here tonight is the sequence of pro-life leaders that I've had the privilege to walk these floors and halls with. And when Trent Franks and I arrived at this Congress, Henry Hyde had the lead. And he did so many glorious things to lay the foundation for life down. And Chris Smith was there at his side the full time that I was here. And then Joe Pitts. I want to remember Joe Pitts as well, and Trent Franks. So I put you four in a category of the leaders in this movement here on the floor of the House of Representatives. And I remain counting those moments precious that I have to serve and work on this cause with each of you. And this bill that we will bring to the floor tomorrow on a rules vote and a final passage vote will pass this floor of the House of Representatives. I have every confidence that it will, and it'll be messaged over to the Senate. And there's a lot of work that's been put in this. The 16 states that have passed the legislation that is similar to H.R. 36, Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. Just add that when Mr. Johnson mentioned the 7 countries that allow for an elective abortion after 20 weeks, of course, the United States. The other 6, he mentioned a couple of them, North Korea, China, which will impose forcible abortions on mothers, cruel and heinous activity, Vietnam, Singapore, Netherlands, and Canada. I think Canada might have been affected with the United States along the way. The Netherlands are one of the more liberal countries in the world. And this list is not a list that I want the United States of America in. I want us out, and I want to be able to send this message that a baby that has a chance at survival at 20 weeks of development from conception, that 20 weeks, that precious little baby that Vicki Hartzler so well described in her presentation here, and I think 65% of premature babies born in the 22 to 26 weeks will survive. 65%. We all know 1 or 2 of those little babies that are walking around. I ran into a friend that I hadn't seen in several years, and at the grocery store here after church a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him how his son was doing, and I'm not going to use names here on purpose. I asked him how his son was doing. He said, oh, he's doing fine. He's 30 years old now. He's got a great job out there. He's got a family. I've got grandchildren. All things were wonderful. And he knew why I asked him, because we were doing a job that he was on back then when that little premature boy was born in the 21 or 22 week old. And when he came back from 2 weeks of sitting next to that child where he could come back home again and go to work, because he was now had a good chance that that little boy would be able to survive. And I said, we'll spend all kinds of money, won't we? We'll do anything. We'll go to any length to keep a child alive who's born premature. A child that's born at 20 weeks, 21 weeks, 22, 23, 24, 26 weeks, there is no expense that we will spare ourselves from, because that life we know is so precious. Well, the life in the womb is as precious as the life out of the womb, and the pain that that child feels at 20 weeks, 22 weeks, 24 weeks. But this little boy, he remembered what I said to him that day. I said, you're doing everything to save this little child's life. But when you go into the polls and vote, you're going to vote on the other side of that issue like you always have. And he called me a name kind of like the president did some of the NFL players that day, but he remembered exactly what I had said to him 30-some years ago, and he said, you know, you really straightened me out that day, because I gave him my remarks on that. Now, that is a change in heart and a change in minds. And America has undergone a change in heart and a change in minds. In fact, I stepped into my staff's office just here last Friday, and the frame of the ultrasound of his firstborn is there. And it's been there for 9 years beside his desk. And that little child, they first bonded with him by looking at the ultrasound. And that little child, by the way, is my godson. So just each one of these lives is so utterly precious. And we're not going to stop. We're going to defend every life we can. We're going to protect every life we can. We're going to do the right thing that we can for the babies that we can save. And meanwhile, this goes on the conscience of America when we fall short. Well, we're not going to fall short tomorrow. We're going to succeed. And we're going to find a way to move this legislation and others through the House and through the Senate to a president's desk who will sign that legislation. And when we contemplate the litigation that's bound to take place, because there are people that are dug in deeply on promoting and defending abortion, we're going to have a new Supreme Court. One more appointment to that court, and we will get this past them and a number of other pieces of legislation as well. And so I thank the gentleman from Arizona for his attention, his years of work on this very precious cause, and all the rest who have done so much to step up and defend these lives. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. There should be a great shout of joy come off the floor of the House of Representatives. I return my time to the gentleman from Arizona.
And I thank the gentleman, and I would now yield exactly 3 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, my very good friend, Andy Biggs.
Mr. Speaker, I express my gratitude and thanks to my colleague and good friend, Trent Franks, for yielding and for his leadership and tireless work on behalf of the unborn. Trent, Congressman Franks, your fight to save each and every life is one that we should all be championing, and I'm proud and pleased to be standing by your side today. I'm grateful that I have had the opportunity to fight for the unborn in venues around the world at various multilateral institutions standing on behalf of the unborn. And Mr. Speaker, I rise today as a proud co-sponsor and in support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. If signed into law, this legislation will prohibit abortion starting at 20 weeks, almost 5 months in all 50 states. The pro-abortion lobby will tell you to disregard the rights of unborn children, but science shows that they are just as human as you and I. In fact, emerging science has proven that babies feel pain inside the womb as early as 20 weeks old. In cases of fetal surgeries occurring after the 20-week mark, anesthesia is regularly administered to the fetus to protect against fetal pain. Doctors have also experienced babies born prematurely at or near 20 weeks who experience pain in the same way that a full-term baby or an adult would. It is inhumane to subject these innocent beings to that gruesome practice of abortion, knowing full well that they will feel every painful moment. Mr. Speaker, I think about my own children and how excited my wife and I were throughout her pregnancies. Even without today's developed science, we knew that our children were special, that they were alive, and that they were helpless, and we had the responsibility for their safety and well-being in the womb. We never would have intentionally caused pain or harm to any of our unborn children. But by allowing this practice to continue, we're not only torturing these helpless babies who will be dismembered limb by limb, we are ending their lives. They will never realize their God-given potential on this earth. They will never be mothers, wives, husbands, and fathers. They'll never be siblings. They will never be able to fulfill the measure of their creation. Their last memory will be filled with great agony and distress. Mr. Speaker, there is nothing that we do in Congress that will have efficacy if we choose to fail to protect the most innocent among us. If, at the very least, we cannot defend those who feel pain, then we are unworthy to lead this nation. We have a great responsibility and charge to protect these children. We will not fail them. Please vote yes tomorrow. I yield back.
And Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman so very much. And I would now yield to Congressman Evan Jenkins exactly 3 minutes and thank him for coming to the floor tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentleman from Arizona and all those who have spoken obviously so emotionally and so passionately about protecting the unborn. Mr. Speaker, I am a proud co-sponsor of H.R. 36, and I'm a strong believer in the sanctity of life and believe each and every person, born and unborn, is a child of God. Our children are our future and a gift to all of us, and respecting the right to life is one of the strongest values we hold as Americans. That is why I come to the floor today to urge my colleagues to support the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which would stop late-term abortions. Studies have shown that unborn children can feel pain in the womb 20 weeks after pregnancy, and agonizing the facts and the disturbing indications that we know that this is a gruesome act against the unborn. As a proud father of 3, we know when those babies come into this world, those cries, those are cries of joy. It's a cry of life, and that's what we are protecting. No child of God should be subjected to the tortuous pain that comes as a result of a late-term abortion. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that my constituents sent me to Washington to promote a culture and respect for life. They know as well as I do that it is vital for us to fight for those who have no voice and cannot be heard. This bill shows the world that America will stand up to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. I strongly urge my colleagues to support the passage of the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. Let this Congress and the vote of each and every member be known as the one who stood up for life by speaking out against the horrors of abortion. I yield back.
And Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman, and it's now my honor to recognize for 3 minutes the honorable lady from South Dakota, Congresswoman Kristi Noem.
Well, thank you, and I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to thank him for his leadership on this piece of legislation, which will quite literally save lives. And I'm so grateful that we're having this debate on the House floor at this point in time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. I believe that every life, including an unborn baby's life, has dignity and value. But more than 40 years ago, the Supreme Court handed down a decision in direct contradiction to those principles. In the decades since, I've joined with many families and my colleagues here in the House, and many across the nation fighting to undo the damage that has been done. We have got a long ways to go in this country, but the passage of H.R. 36 would be a step in the right direction. A strong and growing body of medical research provides evidence that pain receptors develop in unborn babies at no later than 20 weeks. Medical professionals have testified about seeing babies that age recoil from painful stimuli. Others have been able to measure increases in stress hormones when babies inside the womb are subjected to pain. And if fetal surgery is performed, that baby is given anesthesia, in many cases to shield them from the pain of surgery. And yet our nation's laws allow for these babies to endure the pain of a life-ending abortion. It is absolutely heartbreaking. You know, my husband and I, we knew that our lives had completely changed the minute that we heard our oldest daughter's heartbeat. I'll never forget that moment. And I hope that she knows how proud we are of the generous and compassionate person that she's grown up to become. She has grown up quickly, and I love to think back about those days when she was still a little girl and when she wasn't much taller than me. We read a lot back then. We read books, we read the Bible, but one of her favorite books was Dr. Seuss's book, Horton Hears a Who, which says, a person is a person, no matter how small. And each time we read that line, I thought back to those first moments when I heard her muffled heartbeat and thought about Cassidy and thought about a person is a person, no matter how small. I had that blessed moment 3 different times with my 3 different children, and I pray every day that each and every baby's heartbeat would be heard by parents who understand the gift that that life is from our God who loves them dearly. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to defend the smallest among us this week and pass H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for his leadership. With that, I yield back.
And Mr. Speaker, I so sincerely thank the gentlelady. Mr. Speaker, I would now recognize for exactly 3 minutes Congressman Ralph Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of my colleague from Arizona's bill, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, as well as the rights of the unborn. As a father of 4 children and a grandfather to 15 grandchildren, I strongly believe that life begins at conception. I wholeheartedly feel that nothing is more precious or beautiful than a life. I will do everything in my power to continue to advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves. Since the passage of Roe v. Wade in 1973, nearly 60 million abortions have been performed. Mr. Speaker, this is a moral atrocity. I am a proud co-sponsor of H.R. 36, which would make it illegal to attempt or to perform an abortion if an unborn child is 20 weeks or older, with exceptions. Science has proven that babies are capable of feeling pain at the start of the third trimester. It is imperative that we protect the lives of the unborn. Our nation was built upon the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We guarantee that every American citizen has a right to pursue absolute happiness. Our Constitution guarantees that every American has the right to liberty and justice. Should we as Americans then not guarantee that every American has the right to life as well? Mr. Speaker, I strongly urge all of my colleagues to vote in favor of this bill and the protection of the sanctity of life for all Americans. I yield my time.
And Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman very sincerely. Glad he kind of came this way here recently. And I now have the privilege of recognizing the gentleman from Texas, Congressman Brian Babin, for 3 minutes.
You bet. I want to thank my very good friend Trent Franks for yielding the time and for providing the leadership in the pro-life movement. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Child Protection Act. As a proud father of 5 and grandfather of 13, I firmly believe that the value of unborn life cannot be understated. H.R. 36 takes a crucial step to ensure that we protect thousands of innocent lives every year. Scientific evidence clearly demonstrates that unborn babies feel pain by at least 20 weeks of age. And by 20 weeks, an unborn baby is so developed that he or she can hear and respond to sounds. Ending these lives through abortion is both cruel and inhumane. There is no excuse. Our nation must do better. We should not be one of only 7 countries, including North Korea, Vietnam, and China, to have elective on-demand abortion after 20 weeks of development. This is an abuse of the basic human rights, and it's unacceptable in the eyes of God and by any standard of human morality. As members of Congress, it is our duty and our moral obligation to pass H.R. 36 so that we may protect those who are the most defenseless. As our Declaration of Independence guarantees, all Americans enjoy the inalienable right of life. And folks, that includes the unborn. Thanks to incredible advances in modern medicine, babies born at 20, 21, and 22 weeks of age are able to survive. Our medical community strives to save and protect these premature babies. Yet, in an inconsistent fashion, current policy permits aborting a child at that exact same stage of development. Mr. Speaker, the sanctity of every human life must be protected. This bill affirms the humanity of the unborn while curbing the inhumanity of abortion. God knows that it is time that we hold abortionists who perform these late-term abortions accountable for their abhorrent actions. Thank you, and I yield back.
And Mr. Speaker, I thank my very good friend from Texas for speaking on the floor tonight very much. And I also now, Mr. Speaker, would recognize for 3 minutes the Honorable Congressman Jim Banks.
Thank you to my distinguished colleague for yielding. I too rise today in strong support of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. This bill would prohibit any elective abortion attempt of an unborn child who is 20 weeks or older, the age at which research shows children are able to feel pain. I think it's worth noting that this landmark legislation is projected to save between 12,000 and 18,000 lives each year. These are individuals who will become fathers, mothers, technological innovators, service members, and hardworking contributors to our great nation. 10 years ago, studies began to emerge proving that an unborn child is able to feel pain as early as 20 weeks post-fertilization. So as our nation's understanding of fetal pain has become more advanced, projections for pain-capable unborn children have been signed into law in 20 states, including my home state of Indiana. But that's not enough. Despite claims from many pro-abortion groups, late-term abortion is neither safe or, unfortunately, rare. As recently as 2014, it was estimated that 430 abortion facilities in the United States were willing to perform abortions on unborn children 20 weeks or older. This sort of late-term abortion at the point when the child can actually feel the procedure will continue to happen without a federal prohibition. 60% of women, 56% of independents, and 46% of Democrats support this sort of legislation. It has broad public support. Let's ensure that all 50 states have protections for vulnerable, pain-capable children. I have advocated for these protections my entire career, from the State House in Indiana to here in the United States Congress. And that's why today I express my strong support for the passage of H.R. 36, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, introduced by my distinguished colleague, Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona, and I urge my colleagues tomorrow as well to support this important legislation. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I thank Congressman Banks very much, and I would now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman, Congressman Keith Rothfuss.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, they feel pain. The medical field has found clear evidence that preborn babies have the capacity to feel intense pain at 20 weeks. That's what this legislation is about. When a child's body is gruesomely dismembered, they feel pain. When the abortion doctor attempts to use a, quote, less crunchy technique, as we learned in last year's abhorrent videos about Planned Parenthood, when they attempt to use a less crunchy technique, their words, to procure more intact body parts, they feel pain. Mr. Speaker, I shudder to think of the millions of lives taken from this world in such a gruesome and violent manner. Equally disturbing is the thought of how much pain has been endured by the millions of preborn babies whose lives have been cut short since Roe versus Wade. We must do more to promote a culture of life in this country. We must do more to lessen a culture of violence. That's why I rise today in strong support of the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. By acknowledging that babies feel the pain of abortion at 20 weeks, this legislation affirms the inherent humanity of the most innocent unborn babies in our country. To add to that, this legislation also includes protections for babies that survive an attempted abortion. It ensures that children that do survive the brutal procedure and are able to continue to live outside the womb are given the immediate medical attention they deserve so that they have a chance to live. With growing developments in the medical field, children are able to survive outside the womb at earlier and earlier points in pregnancy. Such was the case for Micah Pickering, for whom this legislation is named. Micah was born at just 20 weeks gestation and is now a healthy 5-year-old. The Congressional Budget Office recently reported that approximately 2,750 lives per year will be saved through this bill. That's 2,750 girls and boys, daughters and sons, brothers and sisters, not medical waste, like opponents of this legislation would like you to believe. The United States is only one of 7 countries, including North Korea and China, that allow abortion after 20 weeks. Are we really that kind of nation? Does our Constitution not grant all Americans the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant they are? Mr. Speaker, this is common sense legislation. I urge every single member of this body to take a deep look inside themselves and ask if they support not only inflicting pain on unborn babies, but also denying these innocent babies their constitutional right to life. I thank my colleague, the gentleman from Arizona, for his leadership on this important issue. If you want to stand for a culture of life, vote for this bill. If you want to take a stand against a culture of violence, vote for this bill. I urge all my colleagues to support this legislation. And I yield back to the gentleman.
And Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman so much for speaking, and I would now recognize for 3 minutes the Honorable John Rutherford. All right, Mr. Speaker, I guess Mr. Rutherford has already focused on it in other ways, so I will go ahead and close out tonight by simply saying, Mr. Speaker, that sometimes I think that we kind of get caught up in things and we grow used to something that otherwise would horrify us. Before the sun set this evening, we saw 3,000 unborn little Americans die a tragic and lonely death. And that is in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And Mr. Speaker, each time that took place, not only did a nameless little baby die a lonely and tragic death, but the mother was never the same again. And Mr. Speaker, all the gifts that that child might have brought to this world are now lost forever. And so, Mr. Speaker, I pray that somehow in this debate that we would put aside which people are right and ask what is the right thing for America. You know, the very creed of this country is this notion that all of us have the imago Dei, the image of God, stamped on our souls. And if that's true, Mr. Speaker, then there is a far greater question here than we can ever imagine. And Mr. Speaker, I think if we ask ourselves the truest and deepest question, then perhaps we will begin to see the winds of change begin to blow in this country. And that is very simply, without all of the rationalization, without all of the gotchas and the what-ifs and the avoiding of the subject, if we just ask ourselves one basic question: does abortion kill a little baby? If it does not, Mr. Speaker, then I sincerely am one that could get up and walk out of this chamber and never speak of it again. But if abortion really does kill a little human child, then those of us standing here in the seat of freedom, the greatest nation in the history of the world, also stand here in the midst of the greatest human genocide in the history of the human family. And Mr. Speaker, that is not what we are called to do in this world as this, the greatest nation who ever had the chance to exist on this earth. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that as we debate the bill tomorrow, that we can put aside anything but the truth and just examine in our own hearts who we really are. And if we do that, I believe we will pass the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act October 3rd, 2017. And by the grace of God, it will go over to the Senate, and they will find a way to bring this bill to the floor and pass it and send it to President Trump, who I have every conviction will sign the bill, and for which I am very grateful. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would yield back and say God bless America.
The gentleman yields back.